Welcome to another Figure Week, Hard Surface Week, Organic Week.
Hey everyone, my name is Ahmed Al-Douri. I'm a concept artist and former instructor at Art Center College of Design, Brainstorm, CCS, CGMA, and various other places. And I would like to introduce to you this digital painting course that I've created. But before we get into anything, I just want to thank you for the support you've all given me this whole time. And with the support of so many of you, I've been able to put together everything I know about painting into this digital painting course. You want to become a pro illustrator, concept artist, or even just a hobbyist, but you don't have a clear map to get there. And that's where I come in. I spent the last 6 months compiling everything I know from my 20 years of art practice, and I've turned it all into a map. Starting with foundations such as rendering shapes, color theory, painting basic subjects, understanding brushwork, brush economy, all that fun stuff, deconstructing the skull, drawing it from every angle, all the way to master studies, stylized painting, and you'll find yourself at the end of the course doing a concept art project based on everything that we learn in the first 14 lessons. So how does it work? Well, you sign up, you watch the lectures, do the assignments, post them to the community page if you want, and treat it as a self-study, except for those of you who have signed up for the weekly meeting, where I personally critique your work in a virtual classroom setting. I believe learning by repetition is super important. That's what I've sort of presented a lot in this course, and the assignments are tailored for that, as adapted from my time teaching at Art Center. And each of these lessons have step-by-step explanations in real time. If you've ever seen my videos, you know exactly how I teach. And this course is intended to be a substitute for a college level course, but you don't have to pay the $4,000 or $5,000 per class, racking up maybe $200K in debt. With my custom design course, you'd be paying a fraction of that. And of course, I also have payment plan options if you don't want to pay for the whole thing at once. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, welcome back to Digital Artcast. Thanks again for stopping for another episode. As always, with these episodes, I want to start just by saying, wherever you are in the world, I hope that you're doing well and you're staying safe with projects and staying inside. And if you can't, just be as safe as you can. You know that the world is shit the bed at the moment, and it's a bit of a nightmare. But hopefully, these episodes are keeping you calm and a bit safe and a bit happy that there's someone else in the world going through what you're going through. But yeah, so episode wise, throughout the Artcast tradition the last 5 years, we've had on many types of different types of people, where we've had developers on, we've had artists, 3D artists, 2D artists, tech artists, audio directors, loads of different kind of persuasions and disciplines. And today we're kind of breaking the mold, and I don't want to say it's a complete departure from what we usually do, because it is still within the realm of the game industry. But today we're interviewing someone I don't think I ever thought would come on and chat to us and take time to explain his journey as well. Mr. Danny O'Dwyer. What's happening, Danny?
What's happening, mate? I'm glad we finally got it to happen, because forever I feel like I was like a tennis player, just knocking it back, being like, oh, we're too busy. And the reality is I'm always too busy. Like this morning I was on the phone to a lawyer for an hour. I've been editing, I've been filming. It's not even 12:30 here in California, and I'm already fucking shattered. So I'm delighted to
Yes.
finally sit down and chew the fat with you, mate.
Yeah, it's good. It's interesting, I think, when patrons reach out, because you're always in that headspace of, is this like a legit person or is this a psycho? Am I going to die? Like, am I giving my details away to people? Like, what's going to happen? But yeah, I've been a fan of yours for a long time now, and yeah, I think you were one of the first people whose documentaries I was really paying attention to, because quick kind of history about me, like I was an engineer till I was 29, and through watching game video documentaries, I ended up leaving my safe and secure, well-paid job to go back to university to study art. And
Fair play.
8 years later, here I am working in the industry. So
Yeah.
It's a journey that's been fueled by documentaries. I think even one of the first ones that I watched was the 2-player production stuff that Double Fine done. So like, yeah, that was because I was a backer on that originally on Broken Age, and
Me too. Yeah.
It's
Super series. It's probably still the best like embedded. Like we tried our hand with Hades, but you know they're there day in day out, and they have such an insightful series. So yeah, I was right there with you. I was a Kickstarter one on that too.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, Paul's working with him now. He's a developer on. I think he was exclusively working on Psychonauts too, right? He's in the weeds. I mean, I remember watching when they done the Amnesia Fortnite documentaries, and he was pitching ideas, and I was like, guy's got some skills, like, he knows how to build games. So yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, so I mean, and yeah, backed with you guys on Patreon for a while, and tried to, as much as I could afford at the time, because I've only recently, within the last 3 months, got my first full-time gig after freelancing for a while. So yeah, it's been a bit of bittersweet, but yeah, I've actually got money now, so I've been like, I can pay for the good tiers and get my name on the credits again. So
well, it's like we always feel like it's so hard to do any type of work where you're asking people, especially when it's a creative field, and you know, every one of us has been a starving artist at one stage. So it's like, it's always hard to ask people to chip into something like this when it's like, you know, I feel like very few people in creative fields start with a bunch of money in their back pocket. Like it comes with the territory, right? You're sort of building back up. It's not like going to business school, or even like, it depends. I guess if you're in computer science, you can kind of maybe get in there a little bit better. But like if you're in journalism or any sort of like artistic field, you're always there's a time there where you're eating noodles. So it can be 2 years, it can be 10 years, it could be your whole life. So it's we really appreciate it when folks, you know, chip in. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, actually, I was trying to find my NoClip Summer Jam VIP lanyard that I had lying about.
Oh, it arrived.
Yeah, I recently moved house, so I was like, oh shit, it's not here. So it's back at my parents, but yeah, I was also
hand mailed all those. God, I can't remember how many. It was a couple of hundred anyway.
Wow.
But yeah, people at my local post office thought I was a fucking maniac. But yeah, I got around. The furthest one I think was one went to Morocco, which is feels far in my brain. I think there's one in Tanzania. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think it's a weird thing when you're trying to build this thing of a freelance life and sustainability, because coming from an engineer background, like, you know, the paycheck would come in every month and you wouldn't have to worry about where your money was coming from. But as soon as I started to do freelance, it's like, yeah, you're chasing gigs, you're chasing contacts, checking emails every day. And now I'm kind of lucky where the freelance life is kind of ended at the moment, because I have a full-time gig and fabricated a really great company, and it's an amazing project. We're working with some, you know, Disney and ILM devs, but yeah, like it's a scary world out there. But then you've been kind of building to this, I would say, your whole life. But when I looked kind of back into your background of Waterford College and, you know, where you studied in Ireland, you didn't traditionally go to school for journalism, right? You studied, yeah. So
I was a web developer. Yeah, I was a graphic designer and a web developer. Like I was terrified my entire life of working in a field that I didn't enjoy, or like never finding the job that I wanted to do. It seemed like there was everyone had something they wanted to do, maybe a couple of things, and if you could figure out what it was, then you were doing well. And you know, I feel like Scotland and Ireland are probably fairly similar in that, like, there's not that much going on a lot of the time, so you're not like constantly coming into contact with lots of interesting types of work. Like, some of it's interesting, and I got involved in like local radio and theater and stuff, and I worked in you know, local shops, and you know, did office jobs and worked in a call center and tried to do as much as I could, but I was terrified that I wouldn't find out what it was. But when I was a teenager, I really got an affinity for, my brother did computer science in Dublin and came back with an HTML book, and I learned it when I was 13, 14. I started making websites on the family computer. We didn't actually get the internet for like a year, so I was just building all these Half-Life fan sites and on my like local machine. And then I went on the internet and I was like, oh my God, these websites look way better than what I was putting together. But that's what I did in college, because I'd been doing it by that stage for years, and that's where I got my entrepreneurial, probably the bug then, was I started undercutting local websites. So I just built people a website in a week for like €500, which was, loads for a 16-year-old.
Yeah,
I just kept doing it and earned a bit of money that way. So when I went to college, it was multimedia, and yeah, it wasn't the most exciting time of my life going to college at home, but it allowed me to keep working in the media, keep making websites. I did a lot more stuff in theater. I got to live with my parents for 4 more years, which certainly now, considering I then spent a decade abroad, I'm very grateful for. Yeah. But like anything, it's like any creative field. It takes you a long time to figure out what you want to do and if you're good at it. So it was just, I was at the grindstone.
Yeah, and I think for both of us, because we're about the same age, I'm 1985, you're 86, but which is crazy to think I'm older than you. It blows my mind, Danny, but yes.
Mate, I was watching The Matrix fucking last night. Keanu Reeves is 35 when that movie came out, so he was like, Carrie-Anne Moss is 32. I'm like, I'm older than fucking Neo. Nah.
Jesus. Wow. Yeah, it's crazy times, but but the whole games thing, like, I think you said something in one of the John Romero documentaries where he said, escapism is worth its weight in gold, especially for Scotland and Ireland, because you're on such a tiny island. You know what I mean? So games definitely got me through a lot of that, and I definitely feel like we've almost walked a similar path, because even before I was thinking about leaving my job, I was doing a lot of games media. So I was working for some like independent websites, going to events. Like one of my first things I did in 2009 was I went to interview some guys about iPet, if you can mind that, back in the day when that first came out with the PlayStation camera. And I spoke to one of the producers. It wasn't the A team, it was the B team, but one of the producers on Arkham Asylum when that was first coming out. And that was like my first proper gig, and something also, I think it was Wii Tennis. But yeah, it was like there was things that I'd done back in the day where I thought I was going to go the games media route, and then I think through the art books that came out with the documentaries, you get, especially the Skyrim limited edition, you get the big art book. Thought to myself, art's the direction I want to go, and I had already an interest in drawing and painting. So, but then for you, like, was games still at the back of your head all the way through college? Were you still trying to weld that into your career?
I don't know when the flip happened where I thought, oh, maybe this is feasible, but like probably similar to what you're saying, right? Games did feel like a really important escapist thing, and I don't know if like because there is a hub in Scotland, right, around Abertay and Dundee and all the DMA and Rockstar stuff. So so at least there's that, and not that I was necessarily thinking about going into development, but outside of that, there was none. There's you've got some of the the Consolvania crew are from Scotland as well, so like you've got some of the best games reporting ever done. Oh yeah, up there as well. Video Gaiden, but like it's not it's not there's not loads of it, right? So it still seems far away, and in Ireland it felt far away. So I think the thing that like made me think that it was possible was when I first went onto the internet, I basically typed video games into Google and I found GameSpot and IGN, and I thought IGN looked I hated the design of the website, and I really liked the design of GameSpot. So I was like, oh, I'll stick on GameSpot, and I made an account, and then suddenly, slowly over the years, I'd use it to like, I'd try to do some reviews, or I was uploading video to it, which like not many people were, just like silly little videos, and they're all lost to time now, unfortunately. And then I had a blog on there, and then they had an emblem system, which meant that you could, if you wrote a blog, and only certain users got it who were like not fucking around, basically. But if you tagged it as an editorial piece, it would go on the front page, like on the sidebar. It'd be like community corner, but you're on the front page of like a website that was getting like, I don't know, like 40 million impressions a day. It was insane. It was insane. It was like it was videogames.com, So from there, I started getting a little bit of, like, I felt like I was somewhat connected to a world, but then I was like, I'd have to move to America. You can't move to America. It's impossible. Right. And then after a while, I realized that, like, oh, there was a couple of English guys who worked in the San Francisco office who had worked for the London office. And I thought, oh, maybe that's how you do it. I can move to England. My sister lived in England for years. My aunt's in England. I know England. I like it. I've never lived in London. I have friends there, but like maybe I could do it. And so I was always like, I was doing my college stuff. I was doing my radio stuff. I was doing this game stuff. I was trying to figure it all out. And then it was when I went to live when I finished college, I applied for a job at GameSpot UK and they flew me over for the interview and I didn't get it. And I thought, oh, maybe they didn't hire me because I live in Ireland, because I'm so green and I'm a country bumpkin. I have no idea. There's probably a million other reasons why they didn't take me on, but I thought, oh, I need to be there. I need to be in London and show that I'm serious. So I moved to London and worked as a web developer for 2 years until barely right when I was moving out. I was moving to the Middle East. About 3 weeks before I left, I got an email from GameSpot UK. So,
Wow. And then, so that was your hub before you went to California, right? So there was a gap obviously between hitting London and hitting America. Like, was that like a long span? Was that years or months or?
Yeah, 2.5 years I spent at GameSpot UK, and I'd lived there for about 2.5 years before. So I spent about 5 years in London, and half of that was at GameSpot UK. And I'm pretty quick, like about a year after I started in the UK, I had kind of convinced the management in the US to bring me over, and then it just takes a long while. You have to go through a lot of visa stuff, and there was a management change at one stage, but it kept going, and but eventually it did happen. It did happen, and it was like fucking, I'll never forget the feeling of like being in the hotel, like when I arrived in San Francisco in the airport. First of all, my fucking credit cards didn't work, so it took me like an hour to figure out how to actually get money to a cab driver. And I was carrying everything I had on my back, and I was hungover because we had my going away party the night before the flight, and we stayed out until 3 a.m. because we found a pub that was closing down. It was giving away free booze, so the whole and I packed the wrong things because I packed the drunk, so it was just like I was shattered. And I got into my apartment, and I was like, how the fuck did this happen? Because it was just like, it was basically like a decade of my life kind of trying a little bit and then really trying. Like this was my reason to be for years and years and years. And then to actually pull it off felt like ridiculous. And it's probably the thing that like keeps me working hard these days, is that like, it is ridiculous that this happened. And I'm never going to take any day of this for granted, because there's a world in which I was still working at an AOL call center in my hometown, you know, and you know it's honest work, but it's I wasn't able for it, so you know, I'm very grateful.
Yeah, a bit mind numbing, I think, with those Joe jobs that you have early on, and it's always this thing you have in the back of your mind. There's something else you should be doing, but you don't know what. And I mean, even like the fact that the company I work for now are based in San Francisco, right? So like, you know, eventually at one point, once COVID kind of settles, the plan is to go out there. And coming from Scotland, you know, the small town that I'm in, it seems crazy to think that could be a possibility, that something like that could happen. You know, especially when I left my job, a lot of people said stuff like, you know, you'll never get through uni, you'll never get a job working in games. And, you know, I've managed to work in these big titles and freelance and then now full time. And it's the imposter syndrome, right? You're constantly thinking to yourself, why am I here? Why did they pick me? Like, they're going to find out any minute, like I'm not up to the job, or they're going to sack me. So, but then working from the London office to the LA office, that was obviously a huge jump, right? Because now you're mixing with people that you've only read about or people that you've seen online in videos, and now you're standing in front of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I know
very strange.
My first exposure to you was not even NoClip, it was the Blizzard documentary you done on Project Titan, right?
Yes,
Overwatch. Yeah. Was that far in your career over in California? Was that a couple of years after you had kind of landed, or was that quite soon after you had hit the office? Or because it was 2016, right?
Soon. Yeah, because the funny thing is that like in the grand scheme of things, I didn't spend that long in the summer. I basically spent 2.5 years in London. 5 years in London, 2.5 years at GameSpot UK, and then about 2.5 years at GameSpot in America. God, was it even 2.5? Yeah, around then. Because we founded NoClip in 2016. Yeah, so October. So yeah, so I think I started in the GameSpot office in like it might have been 2014. Right. 2013, I forget. But anyway, yeah, that Titan stuff was probably about at least a year into my time there. yeah, it was basically trying to solve the problem of like, we have access to all these developers and we ask them the stupidest questions. Like we have access to these developers and we interview them at the absolute worst time, which is like months before the game comes out, where they have PR people breathing down their neck and they don't really still know what the final game's going to be. So they're scared about what to say. Yeah. And then all the questions we're asking are about the game. And it's like, no. Like, it's just like the worst way to do this. But we have the access because we're GameSpot. If we call these people up, if I call them up, Yo Schmo, they're like, hey, I want to talk to you about something. They're like, no. But if you call up at GameSpot, every fucking door flies open. So I was like, oh, let's just like do that, but then use it for an actual interview that people would like to do, you know. And so one of them was Titan, another one was Titanfall, you know, and then basically in my head I was thinking actually the way to do this is to talk about games that they did 2 years ago, because that's what because whenever we go to these places they'd happily talk about that shit. But like, of course, your beat on a games website, as you know, is reporting on what's current. So yeah, but those were basically, there's a very direct connection to those. They were called next big game projects at GameSpot, and what NoClip ended up being. Yeah.
I mean, even with Titan, I mean, there's definitely, you know, they were open about the kind of failures they had going into that project, but there was also just so much they'll never talk about, right? There's stuff that just they would never really share what the game was like or what its first incarnation was, or screenshots it, or you would, unless you were on that team, you'd never know. You know, I had a couple of buddies who were there at kind of ground zero and worked on it, and what eventually would be Overwatch. But yeah, it's even in private, it's just something that they'll just never discuss, because it seems like an almost black void in Blizzard's history that they don't want to, you know, expose too much to light, because it seems like, I think because they had so many successes for so many years, hitting a wall like that was almost like, oh shit, because they hadn't, at that point they talk about in the documentary, they hadn't really made a game for so long, a new IP,
right?
So,
yeah. And the other thing is that like game prototypes come and go all the time, and you never hear about them. And the problem with this one is that it got leaked a little bit, and then what happens is there's a disconnect, and this is kind of the reason we do NoClip stuff, is there's a disconnect between like the realities of game development and then what players expect. So when they hear that a game was in development that got cancelled, they think that it was way further along than what it was, and like game development it's not even incremental, really. It's like several different types of things that are vibrating at different levels, and then eventually they settle down close to release, and some parts are vibrating quite a lot before they get in. And so when you tell someone like that was this game that they made, and it was this MMO, but it was also this thing battle, and you had a version of yourself in the open world, and this one, that could be a fucking paragraph on a piece of paper. You know what I mean? Like, it's like to what, but in their head they're imagining it's this full thing. So that the problem is with a lot of this is that like basically companies have learned to be watertight, because you give them if you talk a little bit, like StarCraft Ghost or any of these ones, they turn into stories that are bigger than themselves. They're myths. They turn into something way more powerful. So what I've enjoyed doing is the few times we've been able to actually pop that bubble a bit and be like, oh, this is actually what the Doom, the cancelled Doom game was, or this is how far along Half-Life Ravenholm was, or LMNO, or like the few times you're able to do it. And I try, the one like the Blizzard thing, if we were doing that on NoClip, I would demand to get further down the details with that. But because it was early, I was kind of like, we'll take what we can get. And I mean, it was the first time they ever talked about Titan in a way, so it was at least it was cool to hear a smidge from people like Metzen on it. But yeah, it's just about educating. Well, I don't want to say it's about educating the audience, because that sounds like it's looking down at people. But it's about showing off more of the process of games, and then creating a vocabulary where like everyone knows a little bit more. And in the 5 years we've done NoClip, you can already see that shift.
Yeah.
Like, and that's not just us. That's everywhere. Video essays, other documentaries. Like, we're getting, as game players, we're understanding more about the process, even if we'll never really know exactly how to make games.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for me especially when it comes to NoClip, I think what I love about what you're doing at the moment is that you're almost making it a mission to bring the human side to game development, like what these people go through on a daily basis, how it affects their lives, how it affects their lives post-release, pre-release, you know, with media. I mean, just to talk about one in particular, the Astroneer documentary, right? Which was near and dear to my heart, and I mean, I'm no, you know, I can admit I welled up watching that, and just, you know, and there's people I know who still talk about Paul, right? Who met him, who worked with him in projects, who worked with him at Halo. I mean, one of my mentors at the moment in 3D, he's at 343 at the moment, and knows, and they still speak about Paul and his work, and I think just seeing that whole thing unfold, and because I mean I didn't know the personal story obviously of what happened, and watching it, you know, line by line, you know, especially that bit in the documentary where it's just like, and then Paul died, and I was like,
yeah,
okay, yeah, and you know, it's got to be difficult, right? To do these kind of things is obviously opening yourself up to ridicule when you're interviewing people and you try to expose their history and what they're doing. But then when you're getting that personal on that level, that's got to be something where you're sitting there interviewing, where you're almost like, you know, like you're kind of frozen, like, oh, what did I do? Did I say something else? How do I approach the next question? Did I stop? Wait till he stopped crying? Did I keep asking him? Or, yeah. But did you know going into that initially, or did you let them know that was something you were going to try and talk at length about?
Because of the nature of all that, it was one of the few times where I had to sit down with basically one of the folks there, the guy kind of running a lot of the comms, and was like, all right, how do we talk about this, right? And the reason why is that honestly, with every interview we do, even if it's just like an indie talking about a game that came out that like will be one of our lower watch things or whatever, like we are still basically telling their story for them. We're taking their story from them in a way, and then we're showing it to the world, and we're crafting it. And there's already a responsibility that exists there, and there's a responsibility in lots of ways. Responsibility to the, you know, whatever the truth, quote unquote, to the audience, to the person whose story we're telling, to basically get as close to their truth as possible. Yeah. And then if there's a difference between what their truth is and what the audience truth is, try and bridge that gap. But the problem with that one was Paul wasn't in the room to tell his version of the story.
Of course. Yeah.
So it's a whole other like part of it where you need to also contextualize that. And then and they need to know why I want, what, you know, sort of how I'm telling the story a little bit beforehand, which is never something that comes up. But because of the nature and the sensitivity of it, we definitely had a back and forth on it. And like I feel like we've all lost people. There was a time in my life when I was a teenager where I lost a handful of people who were close to me, and some a little bit not as close to me, but like people I knew who were my age, who passed away. And so this one was kind of like I relatively comfortable with the way they feel about this, maybe like it doesn't feel alien to me. Maybe the way I reacted to the stuff in my own life was different to them, but I've no problem talking to about this stuff with them. But when Adam was crying, I was in tears too. We don't. There could have been a much more manipulative edit of that doc where there's more of that, but we tried to not lean into that drama but
expose that he was upset. This was a big thing in his life. He had lost a friend, so obviously he's sad, he's gonna cry, because I mean, like, everybody deals with grief differently, right? Some people obviously ball into tears, but some people shut down and just didn't open up. But he was
there were people on the team who didn't want to. We were told don't bring it up,
of course. So of course, I mean, and I think
didn't bring it up.
I mean, like, I've just done about 3 or 4 interviews this week because I try, stack them so that they can come out.
Amen.
But the thing, because obviously I'm trying to balance this in a full-time job now, so it's even harder. But a thing that's came up very recently because of the film strikes, right, is conditions in games and mental health and the human cost, the building video games, and probably why so many people I know have went freelance or started their own studios or banded together with other artists to make stuff, like Decagon, one of the guys I interviewed, Clinton, who worked at Coalition for so long and worked in Gears, then left the studio and set himself up as a studio and just brought all his friends together, and now they make art for the games. And he talks about like how the importance of his team's mental health and well-being is a top priority over the projects they work on. If they take something on that's too big, or they feel like it's just going to be too much for this team, or it's going to just tax everybody, then he just will walk away from it, regardless of what it is. So, I think that's why I think myself and other people I know in the industry who, when I first watched the Doom documentary, it was because one of my friends Ed sent it to me, and he was like, dude, this guy just done a documentary on us, and I interviewed all the higher ups, like, you really got to watch it. I think it's great, and I think you'd love it. And I was like, cool, and checked it. I was like, oh, it's Danny. Like, yeah, I've watched this stuff before, and the guys at Ed that I know still talk about that documentary and how they're wanting you to come back at one point and just do another one because, like,
us too.
Yeah. I mean, well, Eternal's been out for a bit now, and yeah.
And what we'd probably do, and it's funny you mention it, because like the thing that makes my toes curl a little bit is like back then as well, it was the start of our process, and we weren't just interviewing the higher ups, and like there's so many things we do in our pre-production now to make sure that we get as much of a like broad number of it's like painting in a canvas. Like if you're just using the same like color over and over, brush is a better way of putting it actually. Then you're going to get one thing, but if you go for different and I mean diversity across the board. Like we had one where I remember we did one video where we asked for a list of interviewees and they came back with 15 white guys, and I was like, dude, like save yourselves for fuck's sake, like come on, like and it was a huge studio, and I knew women on the team, you know what I mean, like personally, and and I knew there was more racial diversity there as well, but what we've done is it's kind of not only that, you know what I mean, it's also diversity in terms of like experience on the team, department, like trying to get somebody from the audio department, trying to get somebody like maybe engineers or people in AI who don't get to speak very often, people who've been in the studio for like 6 months because they can talk about what it's like now, as opposed to somebody who's been working there for 8 years and has a great 401k already, you know what I mean? They're not gonna shit talk anyone. So it's all that, because it is the one. If I talk about like one, I want to go back and really get into the weeds on it, it would be like to do something on anything they're up to, like Doom Eternal or whatever, and talk to Hugo and Marty, but like talk to
Hugo's a legend, man. That guy, oh my god, I could listen to him talk for days. He's just he used
to be a comedian. He used to do stand up, so like
which was perfect, which is crazy as well, but yeah, like it's a thing even where I've tried to actively interview, like my last interview and almost the next 2 or 3 are female developers, which I've tried to like diversify. And then even last year, during all that shit as well, we had a Black Lives Matter panel, right? So I interviewed specifically black artists in America during the time, talking about their experiences working in the industry, because we had like Philip Booty, who was like the lead costume designer on Black Panther and a couple of Marvel projects, and some guys from smaller studios, big studios. So we were trying to get a broad spectrum, and I even stepped aside and let my friend who is African American host the interview, because I was like, it isn't my place, I think, to speak on that. Like, I'm just going to give you guys the platform and away you go. And it's always the thing I found, whether it's either black or African American artists or it's female, like I try to publicize that stuff and people just like bite my head off, and it's a nightmare, because a lot of guys that I put the episodes up for just want to hear from the straight white males, and it's exhausting.
So it depends as well on what you're telling, right? Because if you're talking about someone's experience with their blackness, then for sure, like having someone who's on the other side of that who can really probably get into the nitty gritty on it, in the same way that if you were entering video game developers, you wouldn't want a music journalist doing it. You know what I mean? Like outside of the sort of ethics of it, there is actually a like pragmatism to the point, right? But then it also, like for us, for instance, one of the things that has been really important in the work that we do in relation to keeping up that diversity is also not making the diversity the focus of the interview. Because like for years and years and years, it was like, women in games panel at PAX, or, diversity in games panel. And that's when you stick all your token people on the panel and say, I've done my job, and then walk away, right? So like, and it accounts in all the other ways too, right? Where you have to like, we don't, unless they bring it up, or the project or the story or the game in some way. Like if you're interviewing an African American costume designer who worked on Black Panther, like obviously that's the place for that. If you're if you're talking to like a female exec at a company, or somebody who's lower down in the company, like what do they want to talk about? If it's the exec, then it's probably her job. It's probably like the career progression that's happened. It's the ways in which her job impact the product. If it's somebody lower down. It's probably their experience in college, how they worked, what it's like being on a team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if they bring that aspect of them into the conversation, to at least be aware of it. But yeah, not to just tokenize people in that way, because you can end up, and I think a lot of people did that once like a lot of us started like realizing our responsibility as reporters or podcasters or whatever. I think you do end up like overcorrecting into this way that is just kind of gross in a positive way as opposed to gross, you know what I mean? So finding that balance has definitely also been, you know, everything's a learning curve, and you know, I don't feel any badness in not knowing in the past and knowing now. You know, it's part of
hindsight's a great thing, but you can never call it out. I mean, it's even when we done the panel, I mean, I think because of just what was going on in the country at the time, I felt like powerless, and I thought, well, there must be something I can do, and that was the thing I could do. I could offer my platform to somebody, you know, different, somebody who, you know, because even then when I look back at the history of people I'd interviewed, it was just typically white dudes, right? But then they're the people I've found that are the people who want to talk the most about themselves.
Yes, that's and also the ones that want to talk to you. So that's the other problem, is that we had the same issue. We after a year, kind of, you know, there's like these moments where you look back on everything and you try and get a bit distance. You can sort of like put that in a box of past and analyze it. And we did it again just recently. And you can analyze it in loads of different ways: the cost of production, the quality, the length of videos, the thumbnails, or whatever it is. And one of the things that came up in our first ones is that we had shocking diversity in the first year of our docs, and that's why it came up. And I reached out to basically people and was like, what do I need? What do I not know? I don't know about this. And one of the things that came up was, of course, if I'm first of all a white guy already, I'm going to hear from more people like me. But also, just in general, it is harder to get people who are marginalized. Just from the process of being citizens in which they're marginalized, they're just not that outgoing, right? Or like some are, where, you know, and the advocates, for instance, and stuff like that. But you have to put more work into getting them, basically, and like, because that's the thing. It's like, and we had it recently where we put up a job spec for a podcast producer on NoClip. And you really have to ask, like, you have to like be proactive in saying, like, people will give shit and say like, oh, you're just looking to look like a good little liberal because you're asking for peoples of all colors and background, you know what I mean? But like, you literally have to a lot of the times, because unless you're explicitly saying that the door is open, people have been taught by society to assume that it's closed, and that's not on you. Like, you don't have to be all fucking dire about it and like, oh, I'm not part of the problem, I didn't know. It's just fucking help out your neighbor. You know, that's all it is. So imagine wanting equal rights and everybody to be happy. I mean, what an asinine thought, eh? Like, the idea that if you just don't believe racism exists, then it doesn't exist. You know, it's like, it's all well and good for us to say that, and I feel the same way about, like, now that I'm in it. Also, like, I'm still like, as far in my brain, I'm still like a fucking like scrappy little boy in Ireland who's figuring this all out. But the reality is, I'm also like one of the most visible people in games media right now, which I don't recognize in my day to day when I walk around in my fucking underpants in my house and I have to do a million chores. But like, it is inexplicitly true. So like, having to like also shift your responsibility that way is part of the process. Yeah, and I think it's difficult as well with the things you cover, where even me as a podcaster, you know, and as now as a game developer, when I interview people, you've got to tread a fine line of, I want to talk about your experience, but I don't want to get you fired. Like, it's such a fine line. You know what I mean? Like, because I mean, just on an off cuff, like when I started going to events early on in 2015 to learn about the industry, some of the first people I met and the first people who were my friends in the industry were all from CD Projekt Red, right? Right. Yeah.
So, because like obviously the European connection when we're going to London,
artists.
Yeah. So like when I met a lot of the guys like Marek and Marcin, like they had just finished The Witcher and they were coming over to talk about it in 2015, 2016. And like, it was great at the time to know them and look at the art and think, oh, incredible. But then as the dawn was starting to set and Cyberpunk was getting more and more real, you know, having conversations with those guys, it was like, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting. And, you know, retroactively now looking back at the stuff you've done with CD Projekt Red, like, it's hard now, like, because I think you talked about this with 76 as well, right? Where, you know, I've had conversations with those guys like Marek and Marcin, like they had just finished The Witcher and they were coming over to talk about it in 2015, 2016. And, you know, retroactively now looking back at the stuff you've done with CD Projekt Red, like, it's hard now, like, because I think you talked about this with 76 as well, right? Where post-release now, and you look at how that landscape's evolved, you sit and almost like cringe at like the documentary, thinking, "Oh shit, oh shit." But then it's the same with me interviewing guys back then, because we interviewed Marcy and Marek when they were just finishing Witcher, and I wanted to get them back on for Cyberpunk, but I don't know how to approach that conversation, because how would I discuss that in a way that makes it seem like a positive experience when I know generally it wasn't, right? So I mean, how do you tread that fine line now going into future projects? Have you kind of opened your eyes to the process, or?
Yeah, totally. Like, you're right. Like we did a 6-part series on CD Projekt, and we did a lot of like, we knew we couldn't cover every facet of a company this big because there's only 2 of us, and it was, even then it might have been 350. So the way in which we sort of approached it was we'll tell 6 sort of vignettes from the story. So then at least we're not trying to like tell a broad truth. We're sort of telling Marcin Nowinski's tale of like setting up the company and all that sort of stuff. We had one about like localization, one about quest design, one about that, you know what I mean? So none of them were really about like the entire process. And then afterwards, a lot of stuff like about like the amount of crunch that people were working on, and the amount of like sort of entry level folks that like felt overwhelmed and all that sort of stuff. It was kind of like, fuck, it would have been great to do it, but also like our stuff didn't necessarily get there. But like, next time we're here, like, you need to basically, I need to have more eyes on like the idea of getting people lower in. That's probably where some of that came from. It was probably part of that process was figuring that out. So I'd love to be able to tell you. I feel like we should talk again, like if anything happens. But I've still know a bunch of the folks over there, and like last year, with the conversation before the game was like months and months and months and months before the game was coming out, we were already in some sort of process on like, okay, if you guys want to do something, we need to be like sort of in at this stage a little bit and like doing some stuff. And then I ended up like having a bit of input on some of that, in a way that I can't talk about yet, but we basically COVID fucked everything. So, but I'm hoping that in some stage in the future, hopefully not too far, but like probably, I'm not going to a studio this year anyway. No. Hopefully it's 2022. I am hopeful that we will be able to do like our best work and tell as much of that story as we can, because I know a lot actually at this stage already, but it's just it's trying to talk to the right people and get as much of that out as possible, because I think the story of what happened there is it's like there has been really good reporting which is very accurate, but I also think that that you could go deeper on like process, and there's a lot of learnings from that that would be worth going into. And I wish I could say any more at this stage. And I'm not promising anything, but I do think it's something that is like high on our list of stuff to do.
I mean, it's definitely one of those things where I have enough conversations in my head that I could sink a ship about things I know that I can't talk about. But like, it's totally, I think it's just in a couple of years' time we'll probably maybe get one of those looking back stories, and what were maybe the mistakes they made and stuff they done wrong, like the Titan documentary, like what was the failings, what did we learn, but then because it's still so fresh, it's so raw, you can't quite just at the moment. But I mean, I think
it's funny. And it's different for them because like because that's a publicly traded company, right? Where also the top brass owns stock, so you're dealing with a totally different like, I don't give a fuck. I'm from like, I don't have a shy bone in my body, so I never care. Like none of this stuff intimidates me. Like I'll talk to the higher ups as much as I'll talk to entry level people, and I'll have the same level of respect, and I won't just be intimidated one way or the other. But like, but I also know that like the reality, you're dealing with a different level of caution. Whereas like, for instance, this week, I can't tell you unfortunately which game it was, but we were talking to a single developer who had released a game fairly recently, which has had like mixed response to it. And we really got into the weeds on all like the stuff that the review said, why it was the way they were, how they anticipated it, but ultimately had to make this hard call and this one, and like feels weird about this part and bad about this part, but relieved about this part. So people, it just some people are able to deal with the fallout sooner than others, and also if there's fewer of them, it just makes it easier. Whereas a company like CD Projekt, that's like 800 people, the project took like 7 years to make. There's all this money involved. There's people like who left the company, who got a management position that worked here. You're dealing with a lot of different like stakeholders, and you just have to be aware of it.
Yeah, and I think it's like we talked about the human element of games making and what that entailed, and I think that's why I've tried to strive and interview as many people as I could on the lower end of the spectrum. I mean, like, obviously, even with the Supergiant documentary, right, you were interviewing a lot of the guys at the top end, or some of the guys who founded the company. But when I interviewed Darren Korb, I was almost wanting to interview him at one point because I saw what he was doing, and I thought, I want to dive deeper into what he's really building there. And Darren's a great guy, and everything that he's done for the soundtracks for those games is phenomenal. And as an artist, I couldn't really maybe overlap about what he was doing and try to ask him some questions that I thought were relevant. But when we started to talk, so many things just clicked, were like production wise and process and how he brainstorms or thinks about stuff early on. It was just so similar to me. And one of the biggest things, having some friends at Sony Santa Monica, we always talked about the documentary was great, the God of War documentary, but it did feel like they were missing out so much of the process that, if you look at the original one with Stig, right, back in the day when they had done God of War 3 or whatever it was, that was quite into the weeds. They were really just opening the door to everything they were doing, and they were sitting in production meetings when Stig was playing through the game, and like, I felt like it was almost like the Corey show, even though he would hate me to tell that, but like, it felt like the whole doc was just about him, or the process of him building the game, and some of the highlights.
Yeah, I mean, the framing device of that documentary is them having an executive dinner party.
Yeah,
and it's not a criticism because I really like the doc.
Yeah, exactly.
But if I'm sure if it's not aware of the story it's telling, then the audience is certainly aware almost immediately, whether or not subconsciously or not. That basically what you were doing is talking to it's about the creative direction. And I think, honestly, I think like one of the criticisms I would have of our work is that in trying to cover as much, you do lose focus. Yes. And there's an element of NoClip stuff which is, we're not 100% filmmaking. If we were, I'm very much like in love with the like Herzogian form of documentary, which is that you can lie as much as you want, and he lies everywhere in his documentaries. Right. It's full of embellishments. But as long as he is doing that in service of a greater truth, and some people hate that. Like when they find out that like this was set up, or this was this, or this quote is completely made up. He does this thing where he starts his documentaries with quotes from people that are completely fabricated. Like it's so in your face, the lies. Yeah. And that's one end of the spectrum, right? And then there's the other side, which is the very much Ken Burns. Oh, we are making the video encyclopedia of this historic moment, right? Right. And documentary exists on a plane, and you have to pick where you are. And we're kind of somewhere in the middle where we're trying to give an arc, but we're also like, we probably prioritize accuracy over that a lot. Yeah. That documentary is really good because what it did was it decided it was a movie. And I don't think it lies very much at all, but it decided what it was telling was a story about the creative direction of that game, and the business elements of it and stuff like that. And in that way, it's not a Ken Burns 60-hour Vietnam doc. It's a hour and 45 or whatever it is, a tight hour and 45, which tells a very particular story. But you're 100% right. It is a story about Corey, and it's a story about the performance artist and the acting and that sort of stuff. But the fact, I always found it funny when they had the framing device of them all having lunch at this rich executive's fucking back garden. I was like, well, we're not talking to any texture artists on this one.
See them like sitting under the table and they're throwing them scraps like.
Exactly,
yeah. Just like looking at the table, like, so Dan, do you want to come up and tell us about this tree you made? Like, Dan made a tree. Yeah. Tell me about the tree. Yeah, so it's...
Tell me about the tree. Do you want to keep your job, or I'll pay some crowd in Singapore, a quarter as much to do the job for you.
Oh, dude, as a 3D artist,
outsourcing.
You don't know how true that rings in that sentence, but yeah.
Dude, I want to tell that story. We did the Command and Conquer remastered one, and I got to talk to a bunch of folks at one of those outsourcing companies, and then like 4 or 5 months later, a huge story came out about them, about working conditions and stuff. And I was like,
no.
Gosh, too late.
Yeah,
There's a million and one different fun stories, you know. It's all the human stuff, exactly.
It's the human truth. I mean, even people talk about the outsourcing, but you know, there's studios in China with like 10 people who are absolutely killing it. Like the Wukong trailers that have came out recently, and that team, you know, I think it's like 20 people, and the stuff they're doing in Unreal 5 is like scaring me. Like I'm trying to be, you know, in knee deep in the industry and sitting in 3D every day building stuff, and then I'm sitting looking at their models like, how the fuck are like with like small
like,
team.
you don't begrudge them. You know what I mean?
No,
It's like, if anything, it shows the solidarity that should exist between creative people. You know, where you're like, yeah, totally. Like everyone's getting squeezed. You know, sometimes it's a tighter squeeze, or where you are, you can put up with a tighter squeeze because of the way the local economics work. But like, we're all victims of the, you know, of our class, and you know, certainly going independent with NoClip 5 years ago was solved a lot of those problems for me. But obviously, it's still a huge part of my day to day, because I now hire people who are creative folks, and you need to be very aware that you were, you know, treating them well, because they don't have the power in a lot of cases to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of maybe close on that, but I mean, ultimately, what was the decision that led to you leaving GameSpot? I mean, like, I don't know if you've ever talked too in depth about it, or you can, but like, I've always wondered why you decided that you wanted to almost give up the secure side of your job, or something that would be the paycheck, or, you know, the thing that would keep you going, to go out into the weeds on your own, right? Which was scary. So I think what was more scary for me was being stuck by circumstance. So there are jobs like, you know, my dad worked in insurance, and my mom started later in life in her career and got to work as a teller in a bank. And those are jobs that, like, you know, you can do them until you retire. Working in the games media is like, if you know, as much as I needed an entry strategy to try and break in, you need to figure out how to break out pretty much right away. You need to figure out what your escape vector is, because there's two things. Either you go into management, which is the only way you're going to get paid a living wage, because, you know, games journalism does not pay well. It doesn't pay enough to support a family. It pays well for me to go out drinking in San Francisco every Friday night, sure, but like, not, or, you know, live in a shitty flat in London and with a couple of mates, and, you know, cockroaches in my room, but at least I can, you know, go out in the piss once or twice a week. So, but like, it's not, you can't be an adult, you know what I mean, in those jobs. So like, so I always feel funny about that when I see people who got caught up in it, because it's kind of always been that way, and I don't want to like, woe is me them or anything like that. Like, I feel empathy for people, but for me, I was so terrified of being stuck, of being like in a games writing job, having no expertise, having no way of getting out, that I'd have to like scrape myself a higher wage or change industries, right? So that's why I put a lot of effort while I was working into building an audience, because I knew the only power you have if you work in games press, seeing people like what happened to Jeff Gerstmann and what Greg Miller was having over at IGN, like, and what was happening on YouTube at the time with like people like Total Biscuit or I guess later on Twitch, that like, if you have an audience, that's your leverage. Like, if you make shit that people care about. So I, in earnest, just tried to make stuff that people care about. And then basically at the time I was kind of like, I was coming up on 2.5 years. My visa situation was changing. So before I was tied to working at that company, I had no, and then suddenly I had a green card and I was able to do what I wanted. So I just approached them and was like, I asked for a sum of money that was a lot. I asked for a lot of responsibility to manage basically a whole chunk of their video stuff, which I felt like I was more than qualified to do. And I left it in their hands, and they came back with an offer that was like just under the money in a way that really pissed me off. And and the job was like some hackneyed thing where I'd have to work with a bunch of people who, the whole point of me asking was so I wouldn't have to basically work under these people anymore. So, and I was like, oh, I'd have to still, nah, I'm done. That's okay. So I was fine. It was a very easy decision. And I already had an idea and a business plan for NoClip, and it was scalable. If we got like a quarter of the patrons that I was hoping for, or that we ended up getting, it would have been fine. If we got half, and then, you know, that day just changed my life. You know, September 12th, 2016, when we launched,
I was expecting this much, and then we got 4 times as much, and I was like, oh well, I'll never work for anyone else again unless this whole thing falls apart. So to me it was more scary to not. You know, in the same way for you, probably it was more scary. You had a established gig. Sounds like it was probably pretty safe. You know, it's pretty resilient industry. But it was scarier for you to be stuck in that job, it sounds like, than to go through a much harder process for you. All I had to do was try. I remember talking to Gerstmann about it and saying, like, what happens if this all fucking blows up in my face? And he was like, you'll get your job back. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Go work for IGN. Like, it's fine. Whereas you know, going back to school, trying a whole different industry, that's fucking brave.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you for that. But like, I mean, when I was left, I was still relatively young, and people would say stuff like, you know, first of all, you'll never get into university, so I don't know why you'd bother trying, because you're not a qualified artist. So I was like, all right, cool.
Fucking hell.
Secondly, with stuff like, oh, you know, you'll never
say it.
Say it how you mean it. Yeah, don't sugarcoat it. Yeah. But stuff like, you know, you'll never get to work in a video game, Gordon. Didn't be daft, and you know, and you'll never earn real money doing this, right? And you know, I've done all of those things. Like, I graduated with honours from university. I'm one of the first people in my family to go to university and get a degree. So
Congrats.
That's been a huge thing for me. I've run the podcast for 5 years. You know, I interned at Axis in Glasgow, where at the time we were working on League of Legends and Destiny 2. And then obviously I've had my name in several game credits, and now I'm working
with
terrific.
That's cool.
guys at the moment who are Extremeworks, Disney, and ILM, who are building this new company. We're making an NFT board game, basically, where you buy the cards through NFTs, and then the game facilitates those cards into the game. So
I hear Steam isn't going to allow that stuff.
That's what I read today. Yeah, we've got a separate strategy for that. But yeah, so I'm basically the 3D artist, the prop artist on that team. But yeah, like, you know, everything that people said would never happen. So it's a thing where people will want to say you can't do things because they can never envision it, but like I just never give up.
Or it exposes something in them. I try not to take it personally, because to me it's kind of like, and I remember being that person a bit as well with other folks, where if you see somebody try something that seems really difficult and then they pull it off, or they pull it off even a little bit, like it is difficult sometimes, whether consciously or not, to have that reflect on you and be like, well, why aren't I trying the dangerous things in my life, right? So, like, I don't. I'm right there with you. It's certain. It's easier to feel this way in hindsight, but it also does kind of give you this air of grace, where like, oh, they didn't, like, they're victims of their own situation. Really, they're victims of themselves in the same way that I am, probably in lots of other different ways, you know.
Yeah, I think it's just throwing caution to the wind and saying fuck the haters. That's the ultimate thing you can do, really. And I mean, like,
spite is a very efficient motivator. I will say, like, I was very motivated by people saying I wouldn't be able to, or like job opportunities that didn't happen, or people not giving me what I think is fair compensation for my work. Like, there was a lot of like, I'll fucking show you. But at this stage, I'm in the very privileged position of having nothing to prove to anyone, so I just don't give a shit.
But then you've worked super hard for it. Like, you've worked hard to get there, and I mean, like, one of the biggest inspirations for me as well is seeing my other friends succeed. But then I remember very actively, because I was in games media early on in my career, and I was doing it very amateurly. I was never super professional with it, but I followed Alana Pierce for many years.
Right,
right. And Alana's went from degree journalist to working at IGN, Funhouse, and now she's a paid writer on the Santa Monica team. I mean,
talk about someone who fucking figured out a career path. Like,
Jesus,
Alana's not, you know, she doesn't suffer fools. She knows. I know what that, maybe that sounds a little bit like I'm saying that she's like strategic or something. It's not. No. Like, but she has a lot of talent, but she also is very good at, like, if she sees something that she wants to do, getting there, and that's no easy task. You know what I mean? But the thing that kills me actually is all the people, because now I'm like, what, 35, and I've been in this career now longer than I had been in any other career prior to it. And the thing that I hate is all the people who I worked with along the way who were really good, but just didn't have it, like, maybe a personality that was, or I'm not even sure if it's drive or just whatever it was, an aspect of who they are wasn't compatible with the sort of fucking framework of business and personality that you need in a field, right? The quiet geniuses. And like there's so many of them. And I have friends of mine who were like infinitely better writers than me and presenters than me, and folks that were, you know, terrific in other ways, and they didn't break into this industry, or they had to fall out of it. And some of them have actually been way more successful in different fields that like worked better for them. And some of them are, you know, maybe are still trying to figure it out. And it's those people who I really like wish that I owned a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate.
You could hire everybody.
Hire everybody and just give them whatever they wanted and let them do whatever they want, because like there's so many talented people out there who, for one reason or another, medical, it could be circumstance, cash, access to capital, like you grow up without any money, it's all you see is the people who had the leg up at the start and skipped a bunch of rungs, right? It's that type of thing. So
it's difficult.
I do feel
it's hard now going back and giving talks at universities and trying not to terrify students, like, and talk about, you know, like I'm like, you know, it's took me 8 years. I mean, 5 of those was in education, obviously, but like there was even 2 years post-university where I was living off nothing. I had no money, you know, and I was freelancing. I was doing stuff for free. I was trying to get every gig, and the podcast was just my way of just keeping myself sane and doing something. And now it's got a great following, and you know, there's like there's people who email me who are like, dude, like I'm leaving my job because of you, and I'm going to be an artist, and I'm like, and you know, reading the email with tears running down my face. I'm like, Jesus Christ! But
remember, right now that you've done it, this is the other part with hindsight. Now that you've done it and you look back, you're like, fuck, that was hard. But think about you when you were at the start of that journey. You'd like nothing left to lose. It's just like, it's like you. The younger you are, I feel like the more fearless you are. And I remember, I totally agree with what you're saying, that like it is difficult to say that to people, but also like I remember I did a talk at my university right before COVID, and I remember like looking at these people and being like, oh, they're not, all they see is opportunity. They're not worried about the barriers on the way. All they see is the top of the mountain, and they know they can get there. And sure, it'll be difficult, but all they can see is the top, and they can't wait to be there. So like, you know, that's the other part of a creative life, is that fucking tiring. Sometimes it's easier to look forward than to look back. Yeah,
but then it's good to look back and see where, you know, how far you've came. You know, it's humbling. It definitely is. But anyway, that's
the imposter syndrome.
I'll end it there, Danny, because I know I'm conscious of your time, and I want you to get back to the many things I'm sure you're doing right now, building docs and try to keep yourself afloat.
Editing at the moment, I'm color grading and editing footage of me dressed up as a knight in the woods for our Chivalry 2 documentary. So hopefully that won't be out too long. But that'll be a fun doc. So if you guys have listened to this point, thanks for sticking around. I hope you guys have enjoyed me speaking to Danny. I mean, if you have, you know, jump in the comments below and throw us a like. It's always appreciated. We're on most podcast services at the moment, and if you've got any suggestions for future guests or anything that you want to hear me cover, then of course strike out and let us know. And that's about it. Just my thanks go out to you guys for listening, for Danny for giving up his time. I mean, I hope you enjoyed it. Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, man.
Grand. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Terrific.